The grand hall smelled like fresh flowers and expensive perfume. I stood at the entrance in my plain gray hoodie, the one I bought for $6 at a clearance sale 3 years ago. It was clean, it was comfortable, and it was mine. The moment I walked through those double doors, heads turned. Then came the laughter. Not the warm, welcoming kind. The sharp, cutting kind that slices right through you. My Aunt Brenda covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook. My cousin Felix nudged the person beside him, whispering something that made them both smirk. My brother Marcus stood near the dessert table in his tailored navy suit, and when his eyes landed on me, he leaned toward his fiancée Portia and said something low. She glanced my way and raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. I kept walking. Calm. Steady. Because I knew something every single laughing person in that room did not. My name is Zoe. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. I set my gift on the table near the entrance. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a thin gold ribbon. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Just a neat, ordinary-looking box sitting among towering gift bags stuffed with tissue paper and shiny bows. Portia's fiancé. Wait, I need to be clear. Portia was my brother's fiancé. But standing beside her, refilling his glass, was her older brother Dominic. He had visited our family twice before, always polished, always confident, always with something smooth to say. The moment I placed that box on the table, Dominic looked over. His hand stopped mid-pour. His smile disappeared. He stared at the box, then at me, then back at the box. Nobody else noticed. They were too busy laughing at my hoodie. But I noticed him. And the look on his face told me everything was going exactly as planned. Marcus appeared at my side almost immediately. Seriously, Zoe, he said, keeping his voice low but sharp. It's an engagement party. You couldn't at least wear something decent. I smiled at him. I'm here, aren't I? He looked me up and down like I was an embarrassment he couldn't get rid of fast enough. Portia floated over in her cream-colored dress, her blonde hair pinned back in elegant waves. She looked at my hoodie the way someone looks at a stain on a white tablecloth. Zoe, sweetie, she said softly, there's a boutique down the street if you ever need. I'm fine, I said. Thank you. She blinked, clearly not used to being interrupted, even politely. Marcus put his arm around her and steered her away. I watched them go, my smile still in place. 2 years of their condescension had taught me how to wear patience like armor. I was very good at it by now. 2 years earlier, I had been sitting at that same family's dinner table, telling Marcus about the small business I was building. I was doing freelance supply chain consulting, helping small companies manage shipping costs and vendor contracts. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a fancy title. Marcus had laughed that night too. Supply chain, he said. Zoe, that sounds like a government job nobody wants. Portia, already his girlfriend at the time, had smiled politely but said nothing. My father just stirred his coffee. My Aunt Brenda called it a phase. Nobody asked questions. Nobody offered encouragement. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel, telling myself the same thing I always did. Let the work speak. I poured everything I had into those early contracts. I stayed up past midnight reading industry reports. I studied, I pitched, I failed, I adjusted. That dinner became the memory I returned to every time things got hard. The party was in full swing now. A string quartet played softly near the far wall. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of tiny appetizers and sparkling drinks. The hall held maybe 90 people. Family, colleagues of Marcus's, friends of Portia's from her social circle. Everyone was dressed beautifully. Silk blouses, blazers, heels that clicked on the marble floor. And then there was me, in my gray hoodie and clean dark jeans, holding a glass of sparkling water. My cousin Felix walked past and muttered, "Did you lose your luggage or something?" A few people nearby giggled. I said nothing. Across the room, I caught Dominic watching me again. He hadn't moved back to the comfortable, easy smile he usually wore. He looked thoughtful now, almost cautious. I turned away before our eyes could fully meet. There would be time for that later. For now, I was content to stand quietly while the room decided what it thought of me. My cousin Adiz was the first person to treat me like a human being that evening. She found me near the window, away from the noise, and hugged me properly. "I love this, actually," she said, touching the sleeve of my hoodie with a grin. Very unbothered energy. I laughed, a real one. Adiz had always been like that. She worked as a high school art teacher and had zero patience for pretense. She didn't care what anyone wore or drove or earned. She cared whether you were honest and kind. Marcus was making comments earlier, she told me quietly. About the gift too. Said you probably wrapped an empty box. Something flickered in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like a quiet kind of certainty. Let him think that, I said. Adiz looked at me for a moment, her head tilted slightly, the way she does when she suspects there's more to a story. "Zoe," she said slowly, "what did you get them?" I didn't answer Adiz directly. I just smiled and changed the subject. She let me, but I could see the curiosity burning in her eyes. Across the room, Portia was opening some of the smaller gifts, surrounded by a group of admiring friends. She lifted items from boxes, a monogrammed robe, a crystal vase, a leather travel set, and each one received a chorus of, "Oh, how lovely," and applause. Marcus stood beside her, beaming. He loved moments like this. He always had. Growing up, Marcus was the golden one. The one with the charm and the grades and the easy confidence. I was the quiet one. The one who sat in the corner reading business books at 15 while everyone else danced. Our parents never said they had a favorite. They didn't need to. Some things you just absorb over time, the way walls absorb old paint. You don't see it clearly until you step back far enough. I watched Portia work her way toward my gift. She picked it up and shook it lightly, the way people do when they're trying to guess. The gold ribbon slid slightly. She read the small card I had attached, and I saw her lips move silently. Then she set it aside in the open later pile. Her friends immediately reached for the next glittery bag. But Dominic had been watching too. He stepped quietly toward the table, picked up my box, and examined it for just a moment before setting it back down. He looked at me from across the room. This time I held his gaze. He gave me a single slow nod, small, barely visible, as if confirming something to himself. Nobody else saw it. But it sent a calm wave of satisfaction through me, starting in my chest and spreading all the way to my fingertips. The night was moving exactly the way I had imagined it would. My Uncle Festus found me near the food table. He was my father's older brother, a big man with a loud laugh and strong opinions about everything. "Zoe," he said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to slosh my drink. "Still doing your little freelance thing?" "Still doing it," I said pleasantly. He grabbed a stuffed mushroom from a passing tray. "Marcus says you're barely getting by. Says you turned down a real job offer last year." I kept my face neutral. Marcus had no idea what I earned. He had never asked. He had assumed, the way people do when they decide your choices don't deserve curiosity. The job I turned down was a mid-level analyst position at a firm that would have paid me a third of what I was already making on my own. I hadn't explained that to anyone. I just said no and moved on. Uncle Festus shook his head. "Stubborn girl," he said fondly and walked away. The evening shifted into dinner. I found my seat at table 7, near the back, close to the kitchen doors. I noticed my name card had been placed between two distant relatives I barely knew. Marcus had arranged the seating. I was certain of that. I sat down without complaint and introduced myself to the woman on my left, a soft-spoken woman named Aunt Pauline, who turned out to be Portia's great-aunt visiting from out of town. She was warm and quick to smile. We talked easily about travel, about cooking, about the kinds of small things that make a conversation feel like rest. Halfway through the salad course, she leaned toward me. "You're the sister," she said. "Marcus talks about you." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "Good things." Aunt Pauline paused just a half-second too long. Then she smiled kindly. "He says you've always done things your own way." I nodded slowly. "That's accurate," I said. During the main course, I mentioned casually to the table that I had a business trip coming up the following week. Aunt Pauline asked where. "Zurich," I said, cutting my chicken calmly. "Then Amsterdam." The woman on my right, a colleague of Marcus's named Theo, looked up from his plate. For work. Yes, I said. I'm finalizing a vendor contract for a logistics firm. European expansion. Theo set his fork down. Which firm, if you don't mind? I told him the name. His eyebrows went up. It was a firm people in his industry knew well. One of the most respected mid-sized logistics companies in the country. You work with them? He said. I consult for them, I said. Have for about 14 months now. There was a small silence at the table. Not awkward. More like the kind that happens when something unexpected enters a room. Marcus, 2 tables over, was laughing loudly at something. He had no idea what was being said 8 feet away. Word travels fast at family events. By the time dessert arrived, individual chocolate lava cakes with gold-dusted edges, I noticed a subtle change in the air around me. Theo had spoken to someone. That someone had spoken to 2 others. Small glances were drifting my way. Not mocking ones anymore. Curious ones. My cousin Felix appeared at my elbow. Somebody said you work with Hartwell Global? Hartwell Global. That was the logistics firm. I do, I said. Felix opened his mouth, closed it, then said, How? I built a system for tracking vendor delays, I told him simply. They hired me to consult full-time after the pilot worked. He stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. I picked up my dessert fork and returned to my lava cake. It was warm and perfectly molten in the center. Someone in that kitchen knew exactly what they were doing. I respected that quietly. After dessert, Portia stood and thanked everyone for coming. She was gracious, genuinely so. I could give her that. She spoke warmly about Marcus, about building a life together, about family. Then she mentioned gifts. We'll open the rest tonight, she said, smiling toward the gift table. And every single one means the world to us. She looked briefly in my direction when she said it. Not unkindly. Just noticing me for perhaps the first time that evening as a full person, rather than a background detail. I thought about the 2 years I had spent quietly supporting this family from the shadows. The times Marcus's phone had been cut off and I transferred money without being asked. The time my parents' roof needed emergency repair and I covered the cost anonymously, letting my father believe the insurance had finally come through. Nobody knew. I had never planned for them to. But the time for invisible support had quietly shifted into something else now. Portia reached my box. She lifted it carefully, undid the gold ribbon, and peeled away the brown paper. Inside was a plain white box. She opened it and looked inside. The room was noisy. People chatting, glasses clinking, but the corner near the gift table went still. Portia lifted out a sealed envelope and a smaller, heavier box. She opened the envelope first. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she stopped. Read it again. Her hand came up slowly and covered her mouth. Marcus leaned over to read it with her. I watched his face. The easy confidence drained out of it in real time, like water leaving a tub. The smaller box held 2 handcrafted titanium pen sets, custom engraved with both their names and the date, from an artisan in Switzerland I had commissioned 8 months ago. But it wasn't the pens that had done it. It was the letter. The letter explained the other part of the gift. A fully funded 5-night stay at an exclusive private retreat in the Swiss Alps. Not a hotel, a retreat. The kind that doesn't advertise publicly. The kind where world leaders and senior executives go to disconnect completely. It had a 6-month waiting list and cost more than most people earned in a quarter. I had secured the booking through a client connection 9 months before this party, when Marcus had first announced his engagement. I had wanted to give them something they could never have gotten on their own, not because of money, but because of access. The retreat didn't sell to the public at all. You needed to be referred. I had been referred because I had spent 2 quiet years earning the trust of the kind of people who knew the kind of people who could make that call. Portia's hands were shaking slightly as she held the confirmation letter. Dominic crossed the room. He stood beside Portia and read the letter over her shoulder. When he finished, he straightened up and looked directly at me. Zoe, he said quietly. The room was still noisy around us, but it felt like a bubble of silence had dropped over our small corner. How did you get this? He asked. His voice was different now. The easy social polish was gone. He was asking a real question. A client referred me, I said simply. He nodded. I know that retreat, he said. My company tried to book it for our board retreat last spring. They told us the list was closed. It was, I said. I got on it 2 years ago. He looked at me for a long moment. Then quietly, with real respect in his voice, he said, I had no idea. Most people don't, I said. Portia finally composed herself enough to speak. Zoe, she said, and her voice had lost all of its earlier smoothness. She sounded genuine, almost fragile. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given us. She reached out and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back gently. Marcus stood slightly behind her, and I could see him processing everything. His jaw was tight. Not with anger, with something closer to shame. I had seen that look on his face once before, years ago, when our father had praised my school project in front of his friends. He didn't like being outshone. He never had. But this wasn't about shining. It had never been about that. I had given this gift because they were family. Because despite every cold dinner, every dismissive comment, every laughing glance, they were still mine. And I had never needed their approval to love them. That was the difference between us. The energy in the hall had fully shifted now. I could feel it the way you feel a change in weather. Not all at once, but in small signals. The way people tilted slightly in my direction when I spoke. The way Aunt Pauline touched my arm warmly when she passed. The way Felix no longer smirked but instead watched me with something like wonder. My Aunt Brenda appeared. She was the one who had covered her mouth when I walked in. She stood in front of me now with her hands clasped and her smile uncertain. Zoe, I didn't realize. It's all right, I said. And I meant it. I wasn't carrying bitterness like a stone in my chest. That kind of weight slows you down. I had learned that early. What I carried instead was clarity. A clean, steady knowledge of who I was and what I was building. No one could laugh that away, no matter what I wore. Dominic asked if we could talk. We stepped to a quiet corner near the window, away from the music and the crowd. He worked in infrastructure investment. I knew that from the family introductions. He had his own firm, mid-sized, focused on East African transport projects. He had been struggling, he told me honestly, with vendor reliability on a major port contract in Mombasa. Delays were bleeding his timelines. His current consultant had no real ground-level experience with regional shipping networks. I listened carefully. I had worked adjacent to exactly this kind of problem 18 months ago, for a client in Nairobi. I didn't jump to offer anything. I just asked good questions, the kind that show you understand the shape of a problem before you try to fix it. By the end of our conversation, Dominic had pulled out his phone and asked for my card. I'd like to continue this conversation, he said. Professionally. I handed him my card. He looked at it, then nodded slowly. I found a moment alone near the side exit, just breathing. The night had been loud and long, and I was naturally someone who needed quiet the way some people need water. I thought about the note I had tucked under the gift, separate from the main letter. A small folded card that only Dominic would have seen when he picked up the box earlier and looked inside. It was short. It said simply, asterisk, the people who built this family quietly are still building. Z. Asterisk, it wasn't meant to shame anyone. It was meant to remind. There had been months over the past few years when Marcus's business had stalled and he hadn't told anyone. I had quietly transferred money into my parents' account, knowing they would use it to help him without telling him where it came from. He never knew. I had never planned to tell him. But I wanted Dominic, who was sharp enough to see clearly, to understand what kind of person he was about to do business with. Marcus found me before I left. He came alone, without Portia, and he stood in front of me with his hands in his pockets. The hall was winding down now. Guests were gathering coats and saying goodbyes. The string quartet had finished, and someone had put on soft recorded music instead. Marcus looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. The retreat, he started, then stopped. Tried again. Portia she's really overwhelmed. In a good way. I'm glad, I said. He nodded. A silence stretched between us. Not hostile. Just honest. I didn't know, he said finally. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. About the work. About any of it. You never asked, I said gently. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth, handed to him softly, without edges. He absorbed it. His eyes dropped for a moment to my hoodie, then came back up to my face. "You've always been smarter than me," he said. I left quietly before the final round of photographs. My heels, actually my clean white sneakers, made almost no sound on the marble floor as I walked toward the exit. Adise caught me near the door and hugged me tight. "You never told me what the gift was," she whispered. No, I agreed. She pulled back and looked at me with that tilted head look again. Then she started to smile, slow at first, then wide and full. "You're something else, Zoe," she said. I hugged her again. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I stood beside my car for a moment, breathing it in. Through the tall windows of the hall, I could see the warm glow of lights, the shapes of people still talking, still laughing, but differently now. The laughter in there had changed its texture. It no longer had anything to do with me. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove home in comfortable silence. 3 days later, my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't have saved. Asterisk, "This is Felix. I got your number from Adise. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the comment at the party. Also, do you ever take on junior consultants? I'm finishing my MBA in May." Asterisk, I sat with that message for a moment. Felix had always been the one laughing loudest. And here he was asking to learn. I typed back, asterisk, "Send me your CV. No promises, but I'll look at it." Asterisk, he sent it within 4 minutes. I smiled at that. At the speed of it, the eagerness underneath the pride he'd finally set down. Later that same day, Portia sent a long voice note. She talked about the retreat, about how she and Marcus had stayed up reading every detail of the itinerary. Her voice was warm and genuine. At the end, she said, "I think I've misjudged you, Zoe. I'd really like to change that." I listened twice. Then I replied with a simple message. Asterisk, "I'd like that too." Asterisk. A week later, I was on a plane to Zurich. The seat was comfortable, the cabin was quiet, and I had a window. Below me, the clouds spread out like a soft, endless floor. I opened my laptop and started reviewing the contract documents for the Hartwell meeting. In a separate tab, I had Dominic's preliminary brief about the Mombasa port project. We had already had 2 proper calls. His problem was solvable. It would take careful work and the right network, but it was solvable. Underneath my professional files, I had a photo saved to my desktop. It was old Marcus and me at maybe 10 and 13, sitting in the backyard of our parents' house, sharing a bowl of jollof rice directly from the pot because we couldn't wait for plates. We were both laughing. I didn't remember who had taken the photo, but I had kept it for years because it reminded me of what we were before all the noise. I still believed we could find our way back there. 6 weeks after the engagement party, my extended family held a Sunday lunch at my parents' house. I arrived in a clean linen shirt and brought 2 bottles of good wine. Nobody made a single comment about my clothes. Marcus pulled me aside in the kitchen before food was served. He had something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years, a kind of openness, unguarded and real. "I talked to Dad," he said, "about the roof repair. He told me it wasn't insurance." I said nothing. Marcus exhaled slowly. "That was you, wasn't it?" I picked up a spoon and stirred the soup on the stove. "The soup needs more pepper," I said. He watched me for a moment. Then he took the pepper from the counter and handed it to me, and we stood side by side in our parents' kitchen, saying nothing and meaning everything. The laughter at the party felt like a long time ago. The room had shifted. The story had shifted. And I had not changed a single thing about myself to make it happen.